Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Troop, the Vice President of Community Relations at Seacoast Mental Health Center. We are thrilled to kick off our new community series, The Importance of Self-Care, the Fill Your Bucket series. In case you're new to Seacoast Mental Health Center, we are one of New Hampshire's 10 community mental health centers with physical locations in Portsmouth and Exeter, New Hampshire. We see our clients via telehealth and in person in both of our offices, as well as 24/7, 365 emergency services in our offices and the emergency department of Exeter Hospital. We are also co-located in area schools, in some of CORE and Appledor's primary care offices, and we have a group home in Greenland, New Hampshire. As a community mental health center, we provide a broad, comprehensive array of high quality, effective, accessible mental health services to children, adolescents, families, adults, and older adults who reside in the eastern half of Rockingham County, regardless of their ability to pay. I am thrilled to introduce our speakers, Camber Olson, one of our child, adolescent, and family therapists, and Lisa Bolden, an outreach therapist in our adult services department. So I am immediately going to hand this over to our wonderful speakers. Camber?
Thanks, everybody. As Rebecca mentioned, I am a child, adolescent, and family therapist, and I work out of the Exeter office. I also see students at Exeter High School. And I just want to start by acknowledging you all for coming here today, or well, for logging on today, I suppose, because it says something about what you're up to. I think since we're on the topic of self-care, you could consider this an act of self-care. So it took something to be here, and I just want to acknowledge you for that. So I think I'll go ahead and pass it off to Lisa, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Camber. I'm Lisa Bolden. I'm an outreach therapist and adult psychotherapist for adults out of the Exeter office. And so I work with older adults as well. And I come to this with a love for this field, with a love for getting to meet people and hearing stories, a background in working in trauma and in mindfulness practices, and self-care is a piece of all of that. And so I too am grateful that you chose to take this half hour to spend with us. And so Camber and I are going to kind of work collaboratively together as we begin to introduce this really big topic to you. And so I'll begin by asking that question of what is self-care? We hear this word an awful lot. It's in articles, it's on TV, that we need to take better care of ourselves. And so I thought I would begin by giving you a couple of points that might be incredibly important for you to know. So self-care is an activity that we do, or maybe don't do, that is both intentional or deliberate. So we're doing this on purpose. It gives us a sense of either pleasure or easefulness, or it feels nurturing to us. One of those ways of being that we're going to fill our bucket, as the head of this series tends to our overall well-being. And we can talk a little bit about the different domains of well-being in a bit. Increases balance in our life. That at least is the hope, is that instead of us working all the time, instead of us caregiving all of the time, instead of us running a household, running a business, we also can balance that with taking care of self. So I initially said that self-care is an activity that we do or that we don't do. So sometimes saying no is an act of self-care. Not doing is an act of self-care. Sometimes delegating to others, asking others in your household or in your workplace is another way of experiencing self-care. I just wanted to share a quote from a recent article that I read that I thought really was to the point. That self-care doesn't mean taking a break from your life, but it means focusing on your priorities rather than someone else's. So I think that's really pretty important. It doesn't mean we neglect others, but we are going to turn that focus, that light back on us, and possibly even thinking about our own personal goals, our own personal values, as also a way of giving ourselves some special care. Camber, do you want to possibly talk a little bit about myths?
Sure, yeah. So let's see. Hey, Rebecca, can you advance it to the next slide, please? Maybe can I do that? Well, I'm just going to go ahead then. So there's 5 myths for self-care that I want to debunk for you guys tonight. Myth number 1 would be that self-care is all or nothing. And in fact, it's exactly the opposite. Any act of self-care, no matter how small, is better than no act at all. So you can really think about self-care as being the small moments throughout the day, in addition to maybe some more longer or intentional acts. But it's the small moments where you take a deep breath and, oh, there we go. You just remind yourself, or you notice that you're feeling stressed and remind yourself that it's going to be okay. So it's just taking those moments throughout the day. Myth number 2, that self-care requires resources that you don't have. You can absolutely do self-care with nothing at all. It really requires nothing. As I mentioned earlier, if all you have as for time as a resource, as an example, if all you have is 30 seconds at the end of a meeting, take that 30 seconds or a few minutes before you go to bed. Number 3, that self-care is anything that soothes you. There's lots of things that we do that we think soothe us, but that often aren't necessarily good for us. For me, it would be scrolling on Instagram, or I happen to be a serial online window shopper. And those are things that I enjoy doing, but they're not necessarily self-care. For it to be self-care, it can't be something that you would wake up the next day and feel guilty about having done it. Myth number 4, that we have to earn the right to practice self-care. This just simply isn't true. Self-care is about allowing yourself to have a nurturing experience right now as you are, and not that you have to work harder in order to earn it. Kind of like a car doesn't have to earn an oil change. So, and then myth number 5, that practicing self-care means making a choice between yourself and others. So some might say that this myth would be that self-care is selfish, and exactly the opposite is true. When you are taking care of your own needs, then you have the energy that is required to care for others. So one of my favorite quotes is that you can't pour from a cup that is already empty. So if you're going to be pouring into others' cups, you need to have something in there for yourself as well. All right, Lisa, back to you.
So domains of self-care. So what realms can we practice self-care in? And so we have 5 of them that are listed here that you might consider. And I love actually speaking about these because truly the possibilities are endless. So let's start with physical. What might be a physical form of self-care? For you, it might be getting outside and taking a run. It might mean doing a yoga class. It might mean walking. It might mean sleeping. So you may or may not know that sleep is one of those legs of the stool that without a good night's sleep, we may not be at our optimal self. We might have a little bit less resilience, a little bit less tolerance. Things might impact us more. Possibly, many different things that are impacted by our inability to sleep. So a good night of sleep, or knowing when your body needs to take a nap. I'm one that fights against naps. I have to be quite honest with that. However, those times when I give into that moment when my body says sleep, it's really, really important. This could also be that self-care is tending to medical appointments, to remembering to go for whether it's an annual physical or dental care. All of these things build on a healthy body. And so it could be something like that, could be going for a massage. So things that impact your physical body could be the foods that you eat. And that's a whole subject unto itself, but being intentional with what you eat. And I've always loved, I had a colleague once who used to say chocolate cake is important to my physical and mental well-being. And so it sort of became a bit of a joke, but it's also true that sometimes we eat things that are pleasing to us, and that can feel like a form of care. Another domain is the intellectual. So What would it be like to read something that was interesting, that was funny, that was poignant, that was poetry, that was history? It does not have to be of a certain genre, but maybe something that stimulates your interest. It could be learning something new. So perhaps during this pandemic, we have had all those times where we might have said, oh, I don't really have enough time to learn that, to do that. What would it be like to take an online course? I will tell you that there's so much that is available online now, good or bad. I know we get a lot of screen time, but it's also an amazing time to soak in a favorite author, to learn how to draw, to possibly learn a language, to take a cooking class. Many are free. Some of them do have fees, so you have to kind of be mindful of that. So intellectual, how are you increasing your knowledge or your interest in the world? How are you changing your mindset? Something that maybe someone will speak about in this series is, what can we do to change our minds or our behaviors to change our minds? Lovely things to think about. We have a social domain. What is it like to reach out to friends and family? That used to be a very easy thing to say, and I know now it's maybe more complicated. How do you stay in touch? Do you plan a telephone call? Do you do a socially distanced visit? We've had a couple of bonfires to be able to stand far enough apart to be able to see with our eyes people as opposed to seeing them on a screen. So what might that be like for you to be sure that you're staying connected to your social network? Spiritual, the spiritual domain. This could be religion. This could be another way that you express your spirituality for nature, for the world around you, for all different traditions, for yogic traditions, for how you set your house, how you honor the space and the environment that you're in. So how do you fill that spiritual, that place in your heart and your soul? What might that look like? And then finally, emotional. That's another place that we might consider self-care. How are you able to meet the emotions and the feelings which you may have noticed over these past months, perhaps are different or more intense or less intense, different experiences? Can you become aware of them, and can you possibly accept where you are? Doesn't mean you love it, and also go forward with it. Can you accept those emotions that are maybe you may be more tenderhearted, or you might feel more love and appreciation? And then within that self-care realm, do you give yourself that space to, with compassion and with self-love, care for yourself? And this is a beautiful place to turn this over to Camber.
Thanks, Lisa. And I too think chocolate cake constitutes as self-care. Anything chocolate. So when Rebecca first reached out to Lisa and I to talk about self-care, the first thing that came to mind for me was, well, self-care is great. I go to I could do yoga. I go to the spa to get, well, I don't really often go to the spa, but I might go get my nails done. That there's all these things that I could do. And I got really curious about, well, what's the intention behind some of these self-care things that I do? And in some cases, I noticed that it was not necessarily a place of self-compassion, and have come to find out that it's really very important for self-care to start from a foundation of an intention of self-compassion. So those two terms, they sound like they could be interchangeable, self-care and self-compassion, but really they're separate things. Whereas self-compassion is the way that you regard yourself as you would a friend. Self-care is an act of that kindness, treating yourself as if you would a friend. So it's really important for it to come, for self-care to come from self-compassion, because you could go through the acts of self-care and still not have very good regard for yourself. Just as an example, you might choose to go for a run because it feels invigorating and energizing to you, or you like the way that it feels to notice your breath or to connect it out in nature. Or you might go for a run because you hate your thighs. The act is the same, but the intention is very different. So when self-care comes from a place of self-compassion, it fosters that nurturing. So while the two concepts of self-care and self-compassion are different, they need to work together in order for the self-care to truly be nurturing. So, and just two quotes that I want to share regarding compassion. If your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete. That one comes to us from Jack Kornfield. And I think it really speaks volumes. A lot of people have I wouldn't say an easy time, but they find it easier to extend kindness and care to others, but then leave nothing for themselves. And you too are a member of the human race, and you deserve to have self-care and self-compassion just the way that anybody that you would give that to. And then the other quote coming from Kristen Neff, who is a longtime researcher in self-compassion, is that having compassion for yourself means that you honor and accept your humanness. So sort of as I was speaking earlier, the myth of having to earn self-care practice. You don't have to do anything to earn self-care. You're good just the way you are. All right, back to you, Lisa.
Kind of just want to stay right on that topic and in some ways, but I agree with you. I hear often that people will say, I have a value of, I'm a compassionate person and that is one of my values. And then when I might ask for an example of that, everything would be turned outward as opposed to, and it can be very hard because I will say, and we might have said this, but it's okay to say it again, that at times we might look at self-care as being a selfish act, and that's a hard thing to change. All habits are going to take time. They say it takes 40 days to begin new habits, and it's a little bit at a time. So if each day you can find just that much time to have some self-compassion, you've gained ground. I wanted to briefly mention self-care and resilience. So that word resilience, what does that mean for us? So in terms of health, of overall health, and how it might relate to self-care, resilience is the process of achieving a positive outcome in the face of adversity. I'll just stop right there. So can we find something positive, even though we're going through something really difficult? And sometimes we think of that as a reed, like a reed that's able to bend in the wind. You know, we live on the seacoast. We have these beautiful, tall, I think they're invasive species, but I happen to love them because they make this sound when they move and they don't bend. And in fact, they're impossibly hard to break. And those winds coming off the ocean completely hit them with full force. Can we be that? Can we keep that in mind? And so it's not a trait. Being resilient, it's not like a you have it or you don't have it. We have it to some degree or another. You may find if you're a person that turns your compassion outward, that you can be really resilient for other people. And what we're inviting you to do or welcoming you to do is to think about how can you be resilient for yourself. And so being resilient means possibly changing behaviors or thoughts or actions and practicing different things that might help you to be more tolerant of yourself and of others, and to create that spaciousness and balance in life. And this is such a brief overview that I hope this leaves you wanting a little more because there's so much to be said on this. Self-care increases resilience. So just remember that. If you offer self-care, you might find it just a little bit easier to make it through this stretch of life that we're all going through in our own ways. So some ideas.
Well, let's see. Hey, Rebecca, could you advance to, I think it's one of the last slides. We've got a couple of lists here using some of the domains of some low cost or completely free ideas for self-care.
If not, you should know that you'll be able to get this slide pack. So there we go.
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that too. Yep. All right. So over here on the far left, just some ideas for physical self-care. Taking walks, spending time in nature, drinking more water. That's a challenging one for me. But I always find that when I do, or when I make the intention to drink water, say first thing in the morning, I feel more awake and just more alert. naps, as you mentioned earlier, dancing, one of my favorites. Even something as simple as changing your bed sheets or making your bed in the morning is a really great way to start the day. What is that? Is it the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People? I think that they suggest making your bed first thing, and then you've done something. So, and there's something about being able to just fall into bed and already having it be made at the end of the day. A relaxing bath or shower or self-massage. Obviously, with the pandemic, going to a massage parlor or a spa has been something that has not been easy to do for folks, but you can give yourself even just a hand massage. I find that if I'm feeling anxious or if I'm just nervous about something or just stressed, what I'll do is just take my hands and give myself a gentle massage. So you can also do that for your shoulders as well. You want to talk about mental self-care, Lisa?
You can go right ahead, keep on that, because I have a slide at the end. So
Perfect. All right, I will. So as far as mental self-care, Lisa already mentioned a few of these when she was talking about the domains, but listening to a podcast, this is one of my favorites. And if you're interested in the topic of self-care and self-compassion, there are some great ones out there. It's been kind of a hot topic lately with the beginning of the new year. Exploring or taking a different route home, puzzles, meditation, of course. And I'm just going to move right on over to emotional self-care for time purposes. But again, meditation. And I think it's fair to say that sometimes a self-care practice, it kind of blends between the different domains and could be considered a couple different ones. Journaling, positive affirmations, as Lisa mentioned earlier, setting healthy boundaries, saying no, knowing when you've had enough, when you just can't do one more Zoom meeting. And even though you might want to see your friends or attend a webinar series like this, for you, it could be saying, nope, I just can't do that. And I'm going to go for a walk outside instead. Calling a friend to vent, spending time with a pet, my favorites as well. And of course, music is great self-care.
beautiful. So just a couple of final thoughts here as we begin to wrap this. And you might consider turning something that you do on a daily basis into mindful moment, washing the dishes, taking a shower, paying attention on purpose is very important. Go outside and look at the sunrise or the moonrise. I have a friend who calls me every full moon and says, have you gone outside to just look up in the sky? Pay attention to your senses. These are the gateways of our soul, what we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we smell, what we touch. Pay attention. Self-care can be wearing something that feels really lovely on you, that sense of touch. Breathe on purpose. So that really noticing. Some of you may know breathing practices. I'm sure we'll have a time to go over those with you in a future offering. Create. What does create mean to you? Anything, poetry, art, drawing, anything. Unitask, do one thing at a time as opposed to doing many things at a time. That can be hard. Feel what you're feeling. Seek out a new experience. Be imaginative, be surprised, and then become conscious of what you put into your body and your mind. So these last 2 slides, it's a lot of information, but you might take those slides and highlight something that catches your attention and try it. There's no failure. There's never a failure. Rebecca, I think it's back to you.
Well, I am on Zoom and the computer pretty much all day long, and I could listen to the two of you talk for a long time. It's so great to hear the two of you. And I particularly like the self-care and self-compassion aspect. That was really fabulous. We often say in the beginning of these webinars to have people put questions into the Q&A, but I had actually received a bunch of these ahead of time. And so I'm going to invite the audience to email me questions after the webinar is over, and we can certainly follow up on them. We're more than happy to respond, and I'll be sending the presentation out as was mentioned, because we were having some screen share flubs there. But we will send that out and we can get any questions back. But, we had some that I thought were really great. And I know we're trying to respect everybody's time so that we don't run too long because everyone has been on the computer frequently. But one of them was, what would someone notice if they're not practicing good self-care or any self-care? What are some, whether they're warning signs or concerns, or what might they just be feeling that they might not even identify?
Yeah. I guess I'll give that a shot here. So some of the things could be, you might be irritated. You might find yourself raising your voice. You might find that you're really tired all of the time. You could find that you're minimizing things. Somebody else has it worse than I have it. So you might find that you're becoming grandiose on the flip side of that, like kind of walking around like you're the only one in the space that we have here. You might have a hard time concentrating. In some way, maybe the way to wrap that is to say there's kind of a disconnection from who you are, from your authentic self, and who you think that, who you are, and when you're in your best place. So, yeah.
Deborah, do you have any other thoughts or?
No, I don't. I think you summed it up very well, Lisa.
Well, one of the things, and actually, Camber, I'll direct this to you because you had mentioned that you love to online shop. And so I'm thinking that you might have some thoughts on sort of technology-based self-care. We actually had a couple different questions come in that were basically saying, and I feel as if some of the question might be around, there is often a lot of criticism around if you use technology for your self-care. We're supposed to get off of our screens and interact in a more perceived genuine way. And so there have been some around, well, what if I enjoy to scroll social media? What if I do enjoy shopping? What if I enjoy playing, Candy Crush? Is that self-care? At what point might it not be self-care?
Wow, that's a really good question. Yeah. So I would say, to kind of get back to the intention behind the Self-Care Act, when the intention is to do something that is nourishing or stimulating. For instance, we might use technology to read an interesting article, or to, again, I mentioned podcasts. I love podcasts. So I'll be listening to a podcast about something that I'm interested in, or about something, using technology to practice mindfulness, to meditate. So those are some ways that technology can be self-care for sure. But I think you just really want to get present to, how is this making me feel after the fact? Am I feeling like I've wasted time, or am I feeling like the time that I just spent was well spent? Did I get something out of it that was nurturing? So.
Yeah, so I guess it's all about sort of that feeling, because I know there are, I think we were talking prior to this, that there are some days I get off the computer and I love to read. And there's sometimes I can't look at my Kindle because it's another form of technology. And then there's other days that I could sit on the couch for 4 hours. And
Yeah,
that. So
definitely. And, Rebecca, I think actually you had brought this up in a meeting prior, but just the idea that self-care is subjective and it's very personal. So what self-care might be for you might not necessarily be for me.
right.
I think that's just important to keep in mind.
Yeah. Another question that someone came in is, and it's regards to I think the fact that we are frequently, a lot of us are all home at the same time. There's a lot less, sort of my family, I have teenagers in the house all the time. My husband's in the house all the time. So there were two separate questions that came in, and one was around, is self-care practicing by myself? If this is something for me, does it need to be by myself? Can it involve other people? And then one was really about, how do I set boundaries around my self-care because I want it to be by myself? And I found those really interesting, because that is some of the struggle that a lot of us have is, I love my family, you need to get out of my space. And so I'm curious on, for the audience that asked that, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, that I can't, I mean, you're like reading my mind. There is both that. There is the both I want to do with, and I also want that little bit of space. Can I close the door? I mean, I think when you talk about, can self-care be a joint project, I think about a couple of things that I'll mention as examples. cooking food, having meal times. So in my house, I'll often like put out, okay, what are you feeling like? I love to cook. For me, that's an act of love for myself, for my family. And I feel like that sitting at the table together is really important, to see each other. And sometimes there's something else that we've done in my family over these months, is we've watched concerts together, which we love music. And so we've done let's get a ticket and let's all watch. It nurtures us in different ways. Or there's a poet, David White, who's a favorite of ours. And he does these series of 3 Sunday lectures. And we just sit and listen to him speak in his Irish brogue. And he doesn't even have to say anything. I'm just happy to be there. So those are a couple of brief examples. Yeah.
Nice. I think for me, what comes to mind of shared self-care is going for a walk with a friend. I've, over the pandemic, just being outside among others has been really, really helpful for me. That has been self-care. And I would like to think that for whatever buddy I go for a walk with, that it's self-care for them too, but you'd have to ask them.
Well, that's great. Well, I want to respect people's time. So in closing, I really want to thank the 2 of you. You are amazing speakers in this space, and you're just amazing people anyway. Please, everyone else, keep your eyes open for what else we have coming. We have different things we're looking to line up every month. One is we're hoping to have an activity for the kids over the school break. We're hoping to do something addressing grief with journaling. We have something we're thinking about with Tai Chi, with financial budgeting, all the different components that might be self-care, cooking or nutrition. And we invite the audience to please send us suggestions and ideas, what people are interested in. My email is in all of the communications, so please do send that. And ultimately, we want to leave you with the final thought that if anybody ever feels hopeless or helpless or alone, to please pick up the phone and call us. We are available by our emergency lines 24/7, 365 days a year. Those numbers are 603-431-6703 or 607-772-2710. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Camber. And we hope everybody enjoys this.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.